For quite some time now, I have been contemplating Harry and Meghan's media approach because the full story of it is pretty wild, but every time they make a new mistake when it comes to PR, how they interact with the media, and how they present themselves to the public, it's always a bit puzzling what they're doing exactly and what they could possibly be thinking. We know that they do have some degree of staff, even though they've downsized and outsourced their PR staff. But we also know that Harry and Meghan are kind of notorious for not really listening to advice or following instructions of experts. We've seen it play out countless times. But I've begun to think that Harry and Meghan thought that they were using the same sort of approach to media and using media in the same way that Princess Diana did. And I think that they believed that their relationship with the public would subsequently match Diana's relationship with the public. As we all know, Princess Diana was well liked, even loved by the public. By the end of her life, she was getting very positive press much of the time. There was a lot of interest and speculation about her personal life that may not have felt quite as positive. But in general, she enjoyed pretty positive press and was like the most photographed woman in the world at the time. And I believe that Meghan and probably Harry too thought if they did things the way Diana did in terms of how she used media or her relationship with the media, that then they would have the adoration that Diana did. And yes, I do think that Meghan cooked up this idea or plan and convinced Harry that it's what Diana would have wanted, or that it's how Diana would have done things. Or maybe what Diana whispered in Meghan's ear. Remember that rumor? That Meghan was telling Harry that Diana was speaking to her during yoga? Okay. It was quite evident that she was sort of trying to emulate Princess Diana's BBC interview during the Oprah interview. It really seemed like Meghan was trying to recreate things that she had seen in the press involving Diana even before this, though, which correlates with the whole cosplay situation, copying outfits frequently and copying similar poses quite often. I even think this moment in their engagement announcement, where they were kind of across the pond from the press, that it was an attempt at emulating Diana's relationship with the media, of being sort of shy of the press, I believe is what Meghan was trying to convey with this photograph here and these photographs from their engagement announcement. I think Meghan was kicking things off on this foot on purpose to try to seem sort of shy to the press, the way Diana was known as being a shy die at the beginning. But before we get too much further, I would like to invite you to subscribe if you would like to. Please do consider it. It's totally free and it helps make sure you do not miss any upcoming videos. And click the like button if you want to. It does help the video, but only if you want to. So why does it matter if Meghan and Harry have been trying to copy Princess Diana's approach to media? That they have attempted poorly to emulate her media relationship? Well, because in part it explains a lot of their actions, and if true, would show that there were motives beyond what was apparent and on the surface at the time. It was a strategy that didn't work, it actually backfired, but a strategy nonetheless. No wonder there were tensions. From the outside, we've seen countless puzzling choices from Harry and Meghan that made little to no sense. But when you look through this history of their media presence and how they interact with the public through the media and whatnot, through the lens of Meghan following Diana's life in real time through the media when she was younger, you really can't ignore the parallels of how Meghan chose to engage with the public and the media, as well as the problems that went along with it, which included bad acting. You really can't unsee it once you see it. First and foremost, copying Diana's media relationship isn't just weird, it's out of touch. How did Meghan and Harry even think that they could recreate something like that? Public interest in Diana and the media interactions that she had were complete anomalies. She was alive during that sweet spot where media was getting faster and more capable of reporting on celebrities, royalty, and public figures but before social media and smartphones, which not only ultimately created zero anonymity for all of us, but also sort of dampened some of the interest in famous people to some extent, because there was a little bit less mystery. We have so much access, and we hear about famous people, which is used as an umbrella term here to describe any known person, whether they be royalty or public figures or actual celebrities, but we're able to hear about famous people so much more often. Honestly, we hear about them constantly now. So they've become less interesting and there's less mystery about them. So it's less exciting to hear about their everyday lives. It's less exciting to see paparazzi shots unless it's something sort of out of the norm or particularly odd or even dramatic sometimes, unfortunately. The technology shift alone has been so large and significant between when Diana was alive to when now that Harry and Meghan, ever since their engagement, the differences in technology are huge between those two eras of time. That alone was going to prevent Harry and Meghan from ever creating a similar dynamic with the media as Diana did, because it's just a completely different landscape and situation now. You may wonder why would Harry and Meghan, or Meghan specifically, want a similar experience? Because I do think that this was more Meghan's idea. Whether or not she outright told Harry, oh, we should try to copy Diana's relationship with the media, I don't know. I doubt it. I think she probably wanted to emulate Diana's experience to try, as a means to an end, to try to get public affection, and just led Harry down the path, advising him poorly to do things this certain way. It's easy to find a lot of reasons to not want the same experience that Diana had. She was shy at first, and then she was harassed and followed constantly. She was overwhelmed with reporters many times. And then she formed some relationships with a few journalists, and she did begin leaking information to the press herself. Things like tipping off where she was going to be so as to be photographed, or even leaking stories occasionally. But primarily, she learned how to direct the interest in her towards events or causes, despite a lot of personal dramas occupying the headlines, which surely was unpleasant. By some accounts, this evolved into a mutually beneficial relationship for Diana and the media, as she pushed narratives into the media during her fallout with Charles to expose or frame, depending on how you look at it, herself as the completely innocent party in the deterioration of the relationship, which then thrust criticisms onto Charles. But on the surface, a lot of her media relationships and experience with the press was pretty intense and probably felt quite negative in some ways. Though, of course, there is the side of it where there is a lot of attention on her, where she got a lot of attention and perhaps, in theory, could have felt fed in a way through that attention in the media. And so when you think of it through that angle, it explains why Meghan might want to recreate similar media relationships as Diana had, in that Meghan craves that attention and craves that approval. Maybe she thought that by trying to manufacture similar circumstances with the media as Diana had, she would find herself in a similar position. Diana's media presence, or image even, was honestly dominated, especially when we look back, by the Martin Bashir interview, which was sensational. But she was manipulated into giving it, sadly, and she had begun to feel paranoid about surveillance and even some media, which fueled isolation. The inquiry into the BBC interview found that Bashir's actions contributed significantly to Diana's fear, paranoia, and isolation in her final years. Prince William stated that the interview damaged his parents' relationship and established a false narrative and should never be broadcast again. But Diana's greatest success and part of her legacy was her ability to use the media to draw attention to causes that mattered, and she was able to craft a new public image for herself after she divorced Charles and stepped away from the royal family. By positioning herself as a compassionate and hands-on humanitarian, she cemented her image as the people's princess and moved beyond the narrative of a scorned wife. To that end, the public loved her in part thanks to her dynamic with the media evolving to be more engaging. When it comes to the Sussexes, specifically Meghan, it appears almost like she went through a checklist and rushed through it in like 2 years. While Diana had taken 16 years to navigate and develop her media and public relations, Meghan gave it 2 years initially. First, appear innocent and shy. Remember this phase of Meghan always putting her hand over her mouth? It felt out of place and contrived at the time, and looking back on it, when you compare it to how we were first introduced to Diana, if we're looking at it through this theory, it makes a lot of sense. After Meghan tried to emulate the shy Di image, she rapidly lost interest in that, evidently. Meghan tried to move into the next phase very, very quickly. After that shy Di reputation was built in the media, Diana occupied a space where there was a lot of intense media interest, and Diana at the time initially was trying to sort of withdraw, and she began feeling resentful of the press, according to sources close to Diana and from herself. And during the 80s, when trouble in her personal life became more prominent, this only exacerbated those feelings of wanting the media kind of to be away from her and not really feeling very friendly to the media, which was understandable, of course. So Meghan's version of this phase of Diana's public image was to reignite complaints about the media to Harry, specifically. She wanted to challenge stories that were true but negative, and perhaps most telling, she leaked information and stories to Omid Scobie for the Finding Freedom book. And then she lied that she did that to a judge. She tried to cover up and hide that she gave Omid Scobie stories. But during this time, she and Harry denounced the media at every opportunity. They began being outwardly rude to them and playing games or being manipulative. Most prominently about things like the birth of Archie and who his godparents were going to be and the christening and things like that and the pregnancy, which backfired. Their choice to be defiant and unnecessarily difficult during the announcement of Archie's birth only fueled surrogacy speculation. And their hostility towards the media felt like a gross overreaction. And this happened earlier as well when Harry put out the statement when he was just dating Meghan. This was something Meghan demanded he do. But even after that, after the wedding, when Meghan began complaining about the media more and more, Harry put out at least 1 or 2 other statements about the media and kind of trying to he was trying to defend Meghan, but because it was an overreaction, it didn't match the press coverage that was happening. And a lot of the press coverage was factual accounts of things that were really going on. So it backfired once again and made them look like they were living in a different reality and that they were being absurd and having ridiculous over-the-top demands. But the crux of the issue here is that Meghan couldn't exactly recreate the circumstances that Diana had at the time. Diana's media withdrawal phase was fueled in large part due to her relationship issues with Charles. And Meghan obviously couldn't recreate that. So she went with this, just villainize the media and tell Harry that it's making her feel extreme negative feelings. Remember, she claimed that it was a time in which the media speculation was so bad that she, remember what she said on Oprah, I have to dance around it for YouTube or the algorithm might flag the video, but she didn't want to be there anymore, was the sort of vibe, and that's what she conveyed to Harry at the time, allegedly, according to the Oprah interview. And she was blaming the media for it. And if we are viewing this through this theory that she was trying to recreate Diana's struggle within the public eye and how she used media to her eventual advantage, then it would track with this phase where Diana was withdrawing from the media. She didn't want to be cooperative with media. She wanted to be left alone because she was struggling with things within her private life. This was Meghan's version of that, if that makes sense. And because that didn't actually match reality, at every turn, it seemed obvious just how absurd the Sussexes were being in their assessment of their own media coverage. Their approach became petulant and off base, while Diana's was understandable and made sense, especially once people began to understand what was really going on behind the scenes, that her relationship was falling apart and it was a high stakes relationship and situation. They had children and she was struggling with her mental health. And that's just one reason why The Sussexes didn't get the same results because it wasn't the same thing, but Meghan was trying to force it to be the same type of way, public image-wise, manufacturing a similar emotion and response, trying to, does not work when it's manufactured. With Diana, it was real, it was genuine. With the Sussexes, it was not. As for Diana's media savvy and taking control of her image phase that came next, this is what I think Meghan was most excited for. The interviews, the attention, the sympathy. She was all too eager for this. In 2019, Meghan did the Tom Bradby I'm not okay thing. And then, as the sort of punctuation to her phase of feeling like a victim from the media or conveying victimhood from the media. And then Megxit was Meghan's version of Diana's divorce, of separating from the royal family. Oprah was Meghan's answer to Diana's Martin Bashir interview on BBC. Even down to the heavy eyeliner and dark clothing, it's eerie. Meghan and Harry clearly believed that this would finally lead to the public adoration that they craved. But they didn't, because they lied. Diana told the truth as far as we know. Diana had spent over a decade in the public eye before she really began to successfully control some of her public image. Instead of having a reactionary sort of approach, she began to take more control after about 10 years. And by that point, she had forged a degree of trust with the public. Meghan and Harry rushed this process. Meghan especially never established trust with the public. She never really gave anyone any reason to trust her. And like I said, time. She rushed through it. Time is one of the biggest factors in trust. From the start, there were rumors of questionable behavior, which was seemingly validated by the lack of friends and family at her wedding, for example. Mostly strangers occupied the bride's guest list, and their sensitivities to the press almost always appeared unfounded. So there was this sense that there was something disingenuous about the Sussexes in the public eye and in their public image and media relationships right from the start. The same cannot be said about Diana. And it's difficult to pinpoint another explanation as to why there are so many points in which there is a coincidence that falls into this realm and this theory of trying to copy Diana's process. From the copying of outfits to the process of how she moved through different phases of how to approach the public and her public image and how she wanted to be seen at different points, sort of almost trying to create parallels with Diana as she went, but going at it at lightning speed compared to how Diana did. Because it's so hard for me to think of, each one of these individual decisions, from Megxit to Oprah to the South Africa Bradby thing, like all these little things, even the copying outfits, all just an isolated bad decision. That would be incredibly bad odds, incredibly poor judgment, which we know that they have poor judgment, but it almost makes more sense that it all links back to trying to copy Diana in an even bigger sense than we have previously thought. Like, we knew that she idolized Diana and wanted to copy the pictures and things like that and did weird things with outfits and perfumes and stuff, and saying that she can communicate with Diana. Like, that type of stuff's already enough weirdness. But looking at their process and journey through public relations and seeing the parallels in manipulative and manufactured ways is what I think gives this theory more legs. Harry and Meghan's approach to media and the press, especially during their royal experience, was one of the worst we've seen in modern times, far and away. The only other one who made such egregious errors in PR was probably Prince Andrew. And I cannot think of another comparison that comes even close to the Sussexes and Andrews' failed public image and press strategies. Was there even a strategy? Especially with Andrew, I don't know that there was a strategy at all there. With the Sussexes, though, it appears there really was a strategy, and it was an attempt to emulate key phases and elements to Diana's public relations and press and public image, especially when it comes to in the media space. clearly missing the human side of it, the authenticity, and ignoring the significant investment of time that Diana took to get where she did. You can't just take an outline or a template of what someone else's journey was like and try to force it into your own life and make it your own in the way that it appears Harry and Meghan have with their media relations theory or strategy being to sort of recreate Diana's trajectory, I guess. But it's even more strange when you consider the fact that Meghan saw Diana's experience through the media, through magazines, tabloids, newspapers. That's how she was informed on Princess Diana's journey. Occasionally TV, but not as often. At the time, the most popular medium for reporting on Princess Diana was surely press, like magazines and things like that. And so Meghan saw all of it through that point of view. And when you look at how she's behaved with her own public image and how she's poorly managed her own public image, it kind of makes sense because it always feels like Meghan is just trying to get a specific sort of headline and so fixated on getting specific types of press and reactions from the public and responses, and that her ultimate goal is always to get approval, adoration, be idolized the way she idolized Diana. So that sort of removed her from understanding what was actually going on behind the scenes and how disconnected a media presence can be from the human experience, to where now we have what we've been watching with Meghan, where everything seems contrived and everything seems to be for one specific motive. But let's take a closer look at the strategies and their impacts of three main royal figures, or ex-royal figures. Let's compare the Sussexes and Princess Diana's media experience to a more successful couple in the public eye, real royals, the Prince and Princess of Wales, Catherine and William, whose media strategy and approach to public image has been genuine, organic, and actually the most simple, really rather simple, certainly less tumultuous, but of course not without its own challenges. Harry and Meghan took a super weird approach to PR right from the start, ever since they were dating. And it's well established Meghan was behind much of this. She craved media attention. And Harry had a lot of negative feelings about the press because of Diana's experience. Meghan has been diligent in demonstrating privately to Harry that she too hates the press just like he does. And this lends itself well to her being able to deny headlines that she doesn't like, as the press just being ist or mean. And she simultaneously, behind Harry's back, leaks things to the press and courts media attention at every turn. She tips off her location and her activities and things of that nature behind Harry's back. Very tricky. We also know that Meghan has a fixation with Princess Diana, much like Harry does. And while Meghan seems to be modeling her insatiable desire for press coverage after Diana's excessive press coverage as the most photographed woman over time, it's clear that Meghan has also convinced Harry to use the media to try to get advantage or to manipulate. To try, at least, to create different narratives, the way that Princess Diana famously or infamously, depending on how you look at it, did. Think about things like Harry saying that the king was too busy to see him, when in reality the king offered him a place to stay on palace grounds. That sort of a thing. Manipulating a story to try to gain an edge for some reason. Let's take a closer look at Diana's relationship with the media and how it transformed over her lifetime compared to Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales's rather quiet and disciplined approach, and Prince Harry and Meghan's reckless use of media and how it has influenced each party's public opinion as well as the consequences of each method to PR. Because remember, press coverage, media relations is a key element to the public's opinion of the person. So let's begin with the precedent set by Diana, Princess of Wales, one of the most prominent figures in the media during her time. Her style of media engagement was complex. On one hand, she was hunted by paparazzi. On the other, she strategically leveraged them. She tipped off photographers, pushed certain narratives, and gave candid interviews, like the Panorama one in '95. often seen as a way to gain sympathy, draw attention to her charities, or strike back in personal battles, such as her divorce from Charles. The impact it had on public opinion was largely positive. She won extraordinary levels of affection and sympathy worldwide. However, her manipulations, especially when we look back on them today, created instability in how the public viewed her, the monarchy, and years on, many now view her media engagement in a very different way. Diana, especially with Harry and Meghan's constant bringing it up, has been increasingly seen as media savvy to the extent of intentional manipulations of public opinion, which many find unethical. Her untimely death underscored the toxic relationship between royals or famous figures and the press, creating a cautionary tale for future generations, and the reforms that followed her death set a tone that lent itself to the narrative that the press caused her passing. But in reality, once those reforms were set in place and those sort of safeguards were set in place, the tone really shifted to where paparazzi, although they still were pretty aggressive with Catherine, backed off in much larger numbers than they had with Diana. It did start to change. It did initiate a significant change. Diana's relationship with the media is one of the most layered and fascinating aspects of her life. Pictures of her hiding from paparazzi or being harassed and hunted by them are now incredibly famous. And let me preface this by stating the obvious. The intense media scrutiny and the sheer volume of photographers and paparazzi and public hounding Diana, and even Catherine, who endured much of the same, was completely unacceptable. It was unsafe and just crazy. Like, obviously, nobody should have to deal with that. For personal safety, for mental well-being, that was wrong. And it must have been incredibly challenging for them. But Diana's experience not only created change and changed the way people view what is and is not acceptable or appropriate in terms of photographers and media and whatnot, but also when it comes to press relations, it's one of the most fascinating cases to study because of the evolution that she went through. And by the end of her life, how she was able to really gain a lot more control over her public image in a way that we hadn't seen as much of. There's a lot of just don't engage and ignore the media and you'll largely be left alone because you become less interesting very quickly. And there's a lot of, oversaturation in the media. But that sweet spot in between there where you're able to really control it and use it to your advantage is something that Diana, in a lot of ways, pioneered during a time when the media had begun to shift towards a lot more video and whatnot. Things had begun to change, and she was part of that change in history when it comes to just media and news. But her evolution from a 19-year-old engaged to Prince Charles to a sophisticated media operator who did eventually use the press to her own ends demonstrates the massive shift Diana made to how she viewed the press over those 16 years. Perhaps she realized she could influence the reporting, eventually use it to spin public opinion. Perhaps she enjoyed a degree of the attention. Or maybe it was a form of radical acceptance that she realized the media aren't going anywhere and you might as well use it. Some specific examples that highlight this journey: the press frenzy that kicked off even before Diana's engagement to Charles was announced and the wedding was watched by 750 million people. The media attention was unprecedented, and Diana quickly realized both the power and the peril of being under constant scrutiny. Many cite the 1983 Australia tour as the moment Diana realized that she could use the press to connect with the public, and using her charm and visibility to craft a public persona that was well-liked was something that we began to see take shape. Years later, from 85 to 86, when her marriage troubles began and unfortunately rumors became public, Diana cultivated a sympathetic image, allowing herself to be photographed looking lonely or sad. She had begun tipping off press by this point. Many speculate the motivations were to either get back at Charles or to win the public favor as her marriage began to fall apart, but of course that's just speculation. By the late 80s, she was feeding stories to specific journalists to control narratives, culminating in her cooperation with Andrew Morton for his book, Diana, Her True Story. While she denied involvement publicly, the taped interviews later came out, proving that Diana was fully embracing the press as a weapon and a means to control her own public image. By the time the divorce happened, she had firmly positioned herself as the wronged party, which consequently heaped criticism and disapproval onto Charles and Camilla at the time. Diana's '95 BBC interview, now a scandal in and of itself, was perhaps the most iconic example of wielding the press, described as a PR nuclear bomb. Following this turbulent time, she invited media to draw attention to humanitarian aid in an attempt to avoid media attention on her personal life. Regardless, paparazzi and press curiosity continued, and she appeared to both resent and court this attention, because she did continue to tell the press where she was going to be at various times. And it appeared to be with the intention to provoke Charles or as a response to something that Charles was doing or saying. So you can see how Meghan and Harry here have, to an extent, modeled some of their media approach after Diana's. Even just releasing things into the press or the public realm via social media or other channels on the same days that the royal family have events. This is something out of Diana's playbook. But before we get into that, let's look at the other end of the spectrum, where media control seems to have reached its maximum. And that's with the Prince and Princess of Wales, Catherine and William. The difference between how things were between Catherine and William and the press before marriage and after marriage is really stark. There was a huge shift once they were married. William really reined in and controlled the media in a much more powerful way, because now this was his forever woman, and he had a lot more flexibility or perhaps pull in terms of getting approval to set really firm boundaries with the press, because it was no longer just, we're dating. Their approach has been defined by minimizing exposure, restricting access, and focusing on work. A no-nonsense, no-leaks policy is what the Wales family is known for, which has left little room for silly rumors or controversies to spin out of control unchecked. It just doesn't happen very often with the Wales family, with Catherine and William. But it wasn't always that way. Back before the wedding and engagement, once the press found out William was dating Catherine, she began being followed aggressively by the press and paparazzi. At a certain point, the press got so out of control surrounding Catherine in the streets, following her throughout her day, surrounding her car, that William was furious with this harassment and instructed lawyers to warn the publications. This overwhelming press attention directly influenced their hardline approach to privacy after their wedding. They even had to sue a press organization in 2015 for releasing a sunbathing photo of Catherine, and that was really the one and only time that things got that far. They rarely give interviews. Their engagement interview in 2010, they gave an interview for the Queen's 90th birthday in 2016 that was very focused on the Queen. It wasn't really a personal interview. And William did a podcast interview in 2021. And we've heard a little bit from Catherine herself in recent years, more about her health struggles. But that really was motivated by her duty to the public and her public life, her work, because it's her job to be out there doing work for the benefit of the public, and in public view. And since she couldn't fulfill those duties and obligations, she felt compelled to divulge what was going on in her personal and health life. And so that was really the extent of interviews or hearing from them directly from their own mouths, like interview style sort of situations. When you compare it to the Sussexes' incessant need for media attention or giving vapid interviews constantly, Catherine and William's media presence looks almost non-existent outside their duties, work, and engagements. This gives an air of integrity to their media presence, that it's not about them. And they have clearly held up this boundary that it never will be about them as individuals, and it never has been about them as individuals. Their media presence is very much for the benefit of the work that they are trying to accomplish. The children are firmly off limits as well, with official portraits around birthdays, holidays, and other occasions being almost exclusive. This satisfies public curiosity. It fosters a relationship with the press and, most importantly, the public that the family is comfortable with, and it reduces paparazzi interest the rest of the time. Their quiet approach is controlled, which some people have criticized, but their version of control revolves around access and privacy, which all of us can understand. They aren't using the media to control narratives. They aren't doing interviews about their personal lives or struggles in order to formulate a public image. They view the media as a necessary element to their lives and as a tool for their work and supporting causes. By keeping their media approach cohesive, there is greater public respect. Catherine's health has added a layer of complexity to the Wales family media presence in recent years, as it is personal information technically, but the need to be informing the public of major life events like this and whether she can be present also shows her integrity in her position. In comparison, Diana allowed paparazzi photos to play into her victim narrative, while Meghan frequently was accused of leaking to the press while simultaneously criticizing them. For example, the Friends of Meghan People magazine thing in February 2019. Would you guys like me to cover that? That's one thing that I have never covered in depth, and I would be happy to do so. Leave it in the comments if you want a breakdown of it. Catherine, meanwhile, deliberately starves the tabloids of gossip by keeping family private and limiting interviews, while controlling the imagery through official channels. There hasn't even been any paparazzi pictures of the children in the mainstream press, so that just goes to prove Meghan's nonsense that she said in Oprah and in Netflix that she wouldn't be able to give her kids privacy in the UK. I would argue they have a lot more privacy in the UK than they do in the US, because in the US, you saw the beach photos of Archie and whatnot. Like, you're allowed to take pictures and videos in public places. If you're in a public place, you will and can be photographed. It doesn't matter if you're a celebrity or not, and people aren't really allowed to get mad about it. There is some gray area when it comes to children, of course. But in the UK, there's much more firm stance to uphold the laws about press intrusion. It seems more aggressive in the UK in terms of laws protecting privacy than it does in the United States. To me, my understanding anyway. But leave your thoughts in the comments. The approach that Catherine and William have taken of the less we give them, the less they can use against us seems strategic and protective, not manipulative and reactive. And I, for one, think that the whole protective strategy with their kids is so special and important. And the fact that they've prioritized it right from the start allows them to create better protections for their children as they grow and get through those teenage years and whatnot, where they're wanting more independence and more freedom and maybe aren't always under your supervision. Because Catherine and William have created this dynamic and relationship with the press, that there's this hard boundary and that it's designed and structured to protect their children, I think will result in better outcomes with their kids as they come of age and become adults than we've previously seen. Like, especially Harry. The impact that this has had on their public opinion, safeguarding their reputations and ensuring the monarchy appears both modern but also dignified, has been positive, like vastly positive. They've built trust and goodwill. Coverage is overwhelmingly positive, portraying them as dutiful, stable, and relatable. And Catherine's health challenges, for instance, have actually shown how goodwill can translate into immense public sympathy and a sort of protective vibe towards Catherine. The only consequence I could really think of with the way the Waleses have approached their public image and their media relations is that by avoiding sensationalism, they've secured their role as the future of the monarchy by maintaining a stable and largely respected image, but some people feel like it's a little too controlled, maybe a little too businesslike, or even a little bit boring. But when you really think about it, wouldn't you rather have somebody a little bit boring in a position like that, in a leadership position where you know and can trust and have confidence that there's not going to be scandal and questionable ethical choices and just nonsense, self-centered stuff all the time taking the attention? Isn't that kind of what you want for somebody in that position that's going to take over the monarchy? I feel like it makes sense and is suitable, and so any argument that it's too boring or impersonal or something like that, I feel like just hasn't fully thought through the full picture. But the Sussexes, on the other hand, they have a notorious reputation, especially when it comes to media presence, largely made by their nonsensical approach to media and lack of controlling exposure. On the contrary, they've invited so much press attention that they're entirely overexposed, they've oversaturated the media, and therefore they are immensely disliked. While Catherine and William are incredibly well liked. So obviously, Diana had a much more nuanced relationship with the press, while Catherine and William have remained rooted in disciplined restraint. The Sussexes have been contradictory, often self-sabotaging, overexposed, attention-seeking, and manipulative, which has undermined any and all public trust towards the couple. It's also taken the focus completely away from any attempts at, charity work and things like that. And in this case, when they do attempt something that's kind of philanthropic or, involved with charity work, it feels overshadowed and belittled by their self-focused media presence. This began immediately, too, as we had said. While they were dating, Harry issued that extraordinary press statement condemning harassment towards Meghan, of which there was no evidence at all. If she was being followed, we'd have pictures like these of Catherine and Diana surrounded by the press. We'd have these of Meghan. We would have pictures like this of Meghan. And we don't, because it never happened. We've never seen that occur spontaneously with Meghan, especially not during their dating days, but also at no point after that. People were leaving them alone. And of course, part of that is because Diana and Catherine were going to be the princesses of Wales. They were going to be queen someday. They were marrying the heir to the throne. They were going to be giving birth to the future king or queen. So they had a very significant role in the UK that they were stepping into. Very, very different for Meghan. Not saying she wasn't important, but just very different. And Meghan and Harry's engagement interview is another example. There were inconsistencies that raised suspicions worldwide, which marked the beginning of a pattern for the couple of not being entirely truthful. By the wedding, Meghan was exposed for leaking certain personal details to specific and sympathetic journalists, some suggesting that she curated storylines in the media about her own family so as to appear as a victim and sort of explain away lack of presence at the wedding, much like Diana did with Charles during the divorce. The leaking of personal stories to journalists was also peculiar after Harry's aggressive privacy-driven statement the year prior, so it didn't add up. They gained reputations as hypocrites after the press revealed that they had taken several private jets in a row on the heels of lecturing about climate change, for example. In October 2019, the ITV Africa documentary, where Meghan claimed that they're just surviving, not thriving, and she's not okay. That nonsense. She claimed not many people have asked if I'm okay, painting herself as neglected by the royal family in a way to try to mirror what Diana had described as feeling a bit neglected by the royal family, a bit isolated. Harry admitted that he and William were on different paths, which was a terrible choice, and this on-camera oversharing not only shocked observers, but changed how people viewed Harry and Meghan. They went from being viewed as, supposed to be viewed as being there on behalf of the Queen to represent the Queen on a royal tour, to clearly just in it for themselves and wanting to share details about themselves and tell people how they feel, and the fact that they feel that they're on different paths and that they feel nobody asked them if they were okay is what's most important while you're working. In January 2020, the whole Megxit nonsense began with an Instagram post. Without warning the palace, the couple announced they were stepping back from royal duties via Instagram. It blindsided the Queen and senior royals, showcasing their preference for media spectacle over internal process. In 2020, the lawsuits and leaks furthered this image. Meghan sued the Mail on Sunday over the publication of her father's letter, which felt as though it had been set up to leak. Court documents later revealed that she had allowed aides to brief authors of the biography Finding Freedom, contradicting her earlier denials, and she had to apologize to the judge to avoid being charged. September 2020, the Netflix and Spotify deals were announced. They signed multi-million-dollar media contracts within months of leaving the UK, confirming critics' suspicions that privacy was less a goal than a PR strategy. In March 2021, the Oprah interview was their biggest PR moment. They accused the monarchy of isms and claimed that they were financially cut off without security. Many of these claims were later challenged or shown to be misleading, including the flat-out lie that they had married 3 days earlier than the wedding. This fed perceptions of manipulation. In December 2022, the Netflix docuseries Harry and Meghan was 6 hours of intimate personal detail, including alleged text messages and private family photos. Although those text messages were not like factual, actual, real text messages. Those were fabricated. Those were just like alleged, just a clarification. But the tone of this series was self-pitying, and fact checkers found contradictions with prior statements as well as flat-out lies. In January 2023, the release of Spare, Harry revealed explicit details about drugs and his time in the war and family fights, like the whole William pushed me into a dog bowl. The overexposure backfired. The initial sales of the book were huge, but polling showed a huge collapse in their popularity afterward. The 2023 media tour, including 60 Minutes, ITV, and others, Harry gave multiple interviews promoting the book and recycling grievances that he has made before. This sheer saturation created Sussex fatigue. Attention-seeking moments and PR missteps continued. In May 2023, they lied to the world, saying that they were in a near-catastrophic high-speed car chase in the middle of New York City. Lie. Their spokesperson claimed that paparazzi pursued them for 2 hours. After an awards event, police and bystanders contradicted the account, leading to widespread mockery, seen as an exaggerated PR stunt. August 2023, the Spotify deal collapsed, and they were called grifters by an executive, publicly highlighting that their highly paid contract yielded very little output. In 2024, the whole American Riviera Orchard Montecito nonsense began, and the heavily branded but vague lifestyle project rolled out with Instagram posts and celebrity jam baskets, only to become a big hot mess. Coverage mocked it as inauthentic and opportunistic. And things have only gotten worse from there. Now we have switched it to As Ever and endured 2 8-episode chunks of Meghan's lifestyle show with Love Meghan, as well as countless interviews to go with it. So the patterns in their media strategy are contradiction. They claim to want privacy while they court attention. They release tell-alls and docuseries all of the time. A victim narrative. They frequently highlight personal grievances to gain sympathy. Leaks and ghost briefings. Meghan's involvement with Finding Freedom or friends speaking to outlets like People magazine. Overexposure. Endless projects creating diminishing returns. The more they talked, the less they were believed. And courting attention by bypassing palace protocol or genuine interest. For example, the Megxit Instagram post and interviews without family consultation is not how things are done within the monarchy and the working royals, but beyond that, them courting attention through different means. They volunteer information to the press. They're not asked. Like, it's not like people are interested and our press are coming to Harry and Meghan to be like, hey, would you like to comment on this? We'd like to hear what you have to say about this. It's the other way around. The Sussexes email People magazine and other publications to be like, this is what I think about this. Would you like to publish this piece? And they shop around leaks and comments and things like that. Statements. It's never organic, natural interest in Harry and Meghan that result in these interviews. It's Harry and Meghan shopping around to find platforms to run their nonsense. So the Sussexes take a very manipulative and contradictory approach. The motives for this could be personal brand building, financial gain through media contracts, and attempts to frame themselves as victims of both the royal family and the press for other advantages. But the impact on public opinion has been highly divisive. Initially, there was some people who felt sympathetic, but the overexposure, the contradictions, the lies, the manipulations have eroded trust and led to them being some of the most disliked people we know of. Public skepticism has only grown since inaccuracies were pointed out in their accounts. That's where less is more would have been a good mantra. So they have suffered massive loss of credibility and declining popularity in the UK and the US because of this. Their strategy, rather than elevating them, has often backfired and diminished their influence. So their short-term strategy, although it delivered attention, money, and allowed them to feel like they're controlling their own narrative initially, in the long term, it has demonstrated to be the wrong approach. It has eroded trust, left them marginalized, and made them cautionary examples of how overusing media can backfire. So although Harry and Meghan and Diana both used the press manipulatively, Diana retained goodwill because her vulnerability and causes overshadowed her flaws. Harry and Meghan, however, appear more self-serving. The Sussexes, likely led by Meghan, took Diana's media manipulation but stripped away her subtlety. Instead of balancing personal vulnerability with public service, they relied on oversharing, contradictions, and grievance-driven narratives. This may have delivered short-term attention and lucrative contracts, but in the long run, it left them less influential than when they first left royal life. William and Catherine took this disciplined professional approach that yielded trust and stability, while the Sussexes' erratic and contradictory approach bred skepticism and fatigue. When we zoom out, the big picture, media can be a tool for power, of course, but if it's overused or used deceptively, as it has been with the Sussexes, it will destroy credibility and interest over time. Diana showed both the benefits and the dangers of using the media. Catherine and William learned restraint, while Harry and Meghan doubled down on manipulation with disastrous results, which demonstrates exactly why the lack of integrity, honesty, and desire to control a narrative at all costs, even by means of lies and manipulations, ultimately ruins a public image, perhaps beyond repair. But what do you think of the Sussex media approach in comparison to Diana and Catherine and William's? Do you think that Meghan especially was trying to manufacture a similar trajectory to Diana's? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Thank you for joining me for today's special video. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye!